Um, I'll pass on to Jan because we're going to move into the kind of core courses and those type of things. But look, thanks, Graham, for talking today. Stuart from Excel will be around and working. Stuart Powell from Excel will be around and working at the Doug events. So hopefully we'll hear more from Excel in the future. And I'm sure there's lots of topics we could delve into. So I'll pass over to Jan, go into core courses.
Thanks, Gary. I'd like to introduce Martin Squires, Stuart Robbins, and Martin Callingham, who came in earlier. We've been having lots of meetings over the last X number of months, trying to figure out how to run our core courses during a pandemic online, and those discussions have evolved into several ideas. And it also occurred to me that some of you have never met all of our trainers, regardless of whether you've sent your analysts on their training courses. You've never met them, might not know what the other courses are about. So by way of an introduction, I've asked the trainers to come here, give an outline of each of their courses, and then Martin Squires is going to explain how he came up with this super idea. So I think I'm going to start with Stuart, and over to you.
Perfect. Can you all hear me? Somebody wave. Perfect. Thank you. Well, you all waved, so excellent. It's always nice to be welcome. So, as Jan said, I'm Stuart Robbins. I work for Teradata, so I have a particular point of view as well there, Graham, on what you were saying. Before that, I was at HP. I've been in consulting for about a decade. Before that, I had a real job for 25 years. And I worked at E.ON and Barclays, and I ran analytic teams there. And I cut my teeth as an analyst when I had hair, and that was a long time ago. And I started off at Nationwide, so mostly banking. I think we've got about 3 minutes to talk about the courses. I haven't worked out whether what I'm going to say takes 3 minutes. The joy of going first means that Martin might get 30 seconds at the end. We've got 3 courses, and they fit together kind of through the life cycle of an analyst's career. And I'd like to say that was deliberate right back in the very beginning, but we've been running these courses for some years. They fit together quite neatly. And the original intent was courses that you cannot buy as out in the open market. So we're not doing things like presentation skills. We're not teaching people how to write fantastic Python scripts or SAS or whatever. You really kind of, the idea was that we exposed some of the wounds over time that we'd gathered as a community of increasingly old boys. Sorry, Martin and Martin. So I'll start with being a better analyst, which is my course. And they all run for a day. Historically, we've run them face to face, of course, because that's what the world used to be. And I suppose I wrote mine from the principle that we all know what a good analyst looks like when we see it, but how do you get to be a good analyst? And so what I tried to do was write what I think of as a series of hints and tips about being the sorts of behaviours that an analyst needs to exhibit, the sorts of ways of approaching problems that perhaps I would expect from a good analyst. And I suppose I start from a principle that analysts are born, not made. So what I'm looking for is to exaggerate some traits of the analyst and tamp down on some of the others, make people more self-aware that being an analyst is mostly great, but there are 1 or 2 little behaviours that you need to keep your eyes on. And encouraging people to recognise that their job is about, that you hear the old hackneyed phrase of being in the knowledge economy. Well, that's obviously what we do. And that means they have to think. And they have to think more than the people in marketing or the people in the supply chain or the people in, call centres, whatever it happens to be. So if you're going to be the brains of the operation, you have to understand how to work. Broadly, the course breaks down into half a dozen areas. There's some general, what I think of as general life skills for being an analyst. Things like situational awareness. You know, I always used to say read the newspaper, but they don't, because nobody reads newspapers anymore. But being aware of the general environment, that sort of thing. And then the analytic process, I sort of step through it in varying levels of detail. There's framing the brief, which is really important, because if you don't know what the problem is that you're trying to solve, you're not going to do good analysis. We talk a little bit about data, but very small amounts, because of course we're dealing with all of the different member companies, and everybody has different data. We talk quite a lot about analysis, and that's more about the principles of analysis, things like assumptions, what insight really is versus doing a bit of analysis. All of this is targeted at newer analysts typically, although we have had people with 10 or 15 years experience, because there's always something new to learn. Then we finish off with presenting, not presentation skills, because I'm not a master at that myself, but the sorts of things that you need to think about, like, and I see Paul Longley's joined, things like maps, very important. Bright colours on maps, always good for selling to executives. And the importance of implementation, because all of the above is wasted if you don't focus enough on implementing. And so we talk a little bit about that too. We have lots of case study work, a couple of case study sessions. I would say we have managed participation. This is one of those things about having a certain personality type. I'm aware of the personality type. I am that personality type. So people are, I think, more than encouraged to participate, but not quite forced to. There's group work in the case studies, because I'm trying to get people to think of different ways of working. Again, because if you're an analyst, you very often work on your own, and particularly nowadays you do. So it's about working as teams. What else would I say? Yeah, so we do face-to-face. Because I'm an old boy and I'm old-fashioned that way, I much prefer face-to-face courses. I think it's much better. But we have actually tested it online, and leaving aside technical problems, it did work. It was strangely less satisfying from a personal perspective, but we can deliver those online too. So I don't know if I've taken 3 minutes, but I'm going to stop there. I can't read it, Martin.
We'll go to Martin Callingham, and then Martin Squires can carry through. Martin.
My old eyes, Martin, I can't read it. Over to you, Mr. Callingham.
You're muted, aren't you? Or are you not speaking?
He's muted, talking to himself.
Martin, you're talking to yourself.
Hazard of the old.
Hello, shall I tell a dirty joke? No, it's not. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Ah, right, okay. Yeah, I started the first course, and I was actually pretty worried about it when I did the first course for Doug, because in a sense, I was surrounded by experts, and I was just nervous about going about teaching this particular topic. Now, the topic that has emerged from my course is really the psychology of handling the results of an analysis, the heart of that. Most jobs go through perfectly well, you do the job, it's clear what the job is, it's clear what the results are, and there's no problem. And sometimes it's the absolute opposite. And that's the issue that I try and address. So, I mean, analysis is a rational process, and it is supposed to help people in the company make the decisions related to their job, but it's not always rational. The job, I get people to talk about their jobs, and the job of an analyst is very, very satisfying, fun, and enjoyable to do. And people like very much the positive side of the job. We have access to all sorts of people around the company. We can do what we like, basically. Get lots of toys to play with and data to mess about with, and it's all just a lot of fun. But actually, sometimes it isn't. Sometimes it's the opposite to that. And the issue, therefore, of course, comes down to dealing with the notion of when rationality doesn't work, when the problem is not explained properly, or in our views, not explained properly. There are huge differences in expectation. Now, if you take the notion of rationally supporting an argument, we've had two brilliant examples locally, one of which is recently, one of which is Brexit, where you have two sides, each arguing rational things and still throwing bricks at each other because they can't understand the rationality of the other side. And that is the sort of situation that I'm sure you're all familiar with coming in, that happens with certain jobs in the company. So the way that we go about it is I get the group to decide what's good about their job, and they love their job, and they say lots of lovely things. And then I say, so what's bad about it? And then it all starts, and you get many, many more things. And basically, is no one understands me sometimes. So I then say, your job is very important. That the response is that on some occasions I'm taking no notice of. I said, this is where you earn your money. You earn your money when your client or the client group is not accepting what you are saying. It may be that you're wrong, of course, but actually it could be that they're wrong. So you need to do things about this. And how are you going to do it? How are you going to cope with what we would call the difficult client? Of course, they're not a difficult client. They're a person coming from a different perspective. And I then take them through the fact that their job, I argue, that the job of a person doing our sort of work is the most important job in the company. It's not an add-on, it's not on the side, it's actually fundamental to the success of the company. And actually, many companies have collapsed because of their inability to cope with the issues of the changing world and the resistance of the senior people in this to recognise that. For example, who could imagine that Kodak wouldn't exist today? Huge company just vanished. And you go through Wikipedia, you find dozens and dozens and dozens of massive companies have collapsed over a stupid inability to recognise the reality of the world. And I say this is when your job matters. So you have to fight to overcome the problems of failure to recognise what you're saying. And that doesn't mean being rude and horrible. It means being clever and getting your way around the difficulties for people who have coming to terms with what you're saying. So that's really the heart of what I'm trying to get over. You must do. It is. If you say the client is not accepting my decisions, and you believe what findings you find they are right, you should fight like mad to get those decisions accepted, not just give up and say, oh well, they haven't accepted them. Now we have an exercise which we run in the afternoon, and that is based on a case study. And in that case study, there are lots of issues raised, and we have three personalities. And we give information about those three personalities. And then we take the problem, we don't handle the problem, I take the problem, then list 6 or 7 solutions to that problem. And with the information, and then we break the course into 3 groups or 4 groups, and then each group addresses that problem and then has to decide what they think on the basis of the information they have is the best solution of the given list to it. And do you know, they pick different solutions. And this is a fundamentally important issue because the people on the course are good, high quality, often very experienced analysts. How can they, with the same information, pick different solutions? So that's the first lesson. There is no one solution. There are alternative solutions. There are different ways of skinning the cat. So that's a very important lesson. The next thing we do is we introduce characters that work in the company with their different weird characteristics, like we all know, like ourselves, for example. And can you still hear me? Can you still hear? Yeah, thank you. Yeah, great, thank you. And then we ask them to work out what each of those characters really want out of the options that they've been working on. And so they have to discuss the psychology of their clients. They have to cross the bridge from the data to the people sitting, listening to what they're saying and trying to understand their standpoint. And then once they've done that, we say, so which solution that we've got, of the 7 or whatever it is, would each of these clients want? And then in each group, and which would they not want? And then in each group, we make them take the client and the problem they don't want and create a rational argument, or an argument, I shouldn't say rational argument, to overcome that person's objections to that, to accepting the one they don't want. So that's essentially the heart of the whole course. And it's very, very interesting when you get a group of high quality analysts coming up with just different solutions to the problem, different solutions for overcoming the objections that a client might have when they have an emotional attachment to what that solution is. So that's it in a nutshell. It's fun to do, and they like doing it. They do enjoy this.
Thank you, Martin.
So
Thank you. Martin.
Hey, hiya. Right, so I guess mine was the third course to come into being, and was the result of me having too much wine with Keith Dugmore at one of the annual Christmas bashes, and opened my trap and got persuaded to do this. We were looking at what courses only Doug could do this and what could be built, and I think I've made the comment to Keith that we had what I think in Stuart's course is a really good course on how to be a bloody good analyst. And I think what Martin's course does is the people I sent on Martin's course were people I wanted to be a really good senior analyst, because I think that skill set that Martin's course builds is what makes a difference between a senior analyst and an analyst. And what I mentioned to Keith was I probably was one of the people that Stuart talks about that skill set of analyst born. I kind of possessed too many Wisden cricket almanacs and Parnell football almanacs as a kid, and I kind of had the skill set to build on. And I'm unusual and blessed on Myers-Briggs with being an ENTP, which kind of gets you to be a senior analyst, because when actually everybody goes, who's interested, everybody else goes, I'm not sure, and I just go, me. So kind of, I got to be senior analyst just by being a gobby bastard. What I did nearly cause myself a nervous breakdown, though, was going from senior analyst to managing for the first time and leading, which I think is a massive change and really difficult. And that's where I taught myself into a course. So the course is aimed at people who are either senior analysts who people are talking about promoting for the first time, or people who are kind of year one, kind of in the job and thinking, what the hell did I let myself in for? And there's been a few people a bit more experienced gone on it as well, but its sweet spot is people in kind of 18 months either side of a promotion into leadership role for the first time. It hangs off that I think that leadership decision of who do you promote still comes down to what I'd call the kind of Mike Brealey, Ian Botham problem. So for anybody old enough to remember the Ashes series and Botham captain in England, because he was the probably the world's best all-rounder at the time, but an appalling captain, and Brealey, who was at best a pretty average test batsman, and that's being generous, gets fetched in because as Rod Hogg, the Australian, said, the man had a degree in people. And England win. You can look at the same thing on football. You look at the guys who've won the most Premiership titles as managers. Ferguson was a fairly crap centre forward with Aberdeen. Klopp and Wenger were both second division equivalent players in their countries, and Mourinho was too fat and slow to play professional football. I can sympathise. Rugby, if that's your bag, Joe Schmidt, the Irish coach, very, very successful. He was a school teacher, which I think oddly says a lot about the skill set. I think where it gets people in trouble is HR are not very good at working out actually what leadership training analytical leaders or knowledge leaders need. They always assume that people want the sort of pseudo-military traditional model and everybody wants to be the chief exec, and it doesn't really work. And what happens without that as well is you got promoted because you were the best analyst. You're now asked to lead a team. You try to do both jobs and be the best analyst and lead the team, and it just does not work. So the course itself, that's probably the first half an hour of it in a nutshell anyway. But the course goes through, I use a thing called Career Anchors, which we get all the people on the course to do this. It's a questionnaire. It's not quite Myers-Briggs type stuff, but what it does is it tells you what the main drivers you want to have satisfaction in your career are. One of them is managerial, which is the I want to be the CEO one. But the others include things like autonomy, technical, service dedication, or lifestyle. Oddly, what's happened for a group of people who are managers or wanting to be managers, in 10 years, only 10% of people have ever actually identified managerial as their key driver, which kind of puts a bit of bones behind the Martin didn't just invent the bullshit about Ian Botham. I've now got stats. When we started doing it, the big drivers were autonomy and technical, generally, or service dedication. So people either wanted to serve others and provide the assist for the marketeers or the commercial guys and wanted to be the backup for them. They wanted to be their sort of the hand of the king, not the king. Very much that sort of skill set was in there. For me, when I did it, it was autonomy and technical, which meant I'd caused myself a massive problem still wanting to be the best analyst long after I should have left the coding tools alone. And the first leadership job I ever applied for was because I figured out actually there was less people to tell me what to do if I got promoted. And the other guy who was going for the job was a grade A prick, and I wasn't going to listen to him telling me what to do. So I had to kind of go for it. But not because I wanted to run anything. It was just I didn't want to report into the other bloody option. So we go through that, and I think it helps with both actually people realizing what actually they get value from, but also people have done it with their teams subsequently, which again gets the fact that actually people don't trust, analysts don't tend to trust people who want to be CEOs either. So I think once you kind of realize that some leadership training gives you habits, your team just go, oh shit, he's been on a course. It's trying to provide the antidote to some of that. So what the rest of the course then does, I go through a leadership model which compares traditional leadership models to a knowledge worker leadership model. The nutshell version, trying to stick to the timing, is traditional leadership model, very militarily type based. You can tell people what to do, basically. I've never actually had many analysts I can get away with telling them what to do. I've usually got to at least partly influence and persuade, but it's far more that people are too highly skilled and too intelligent to actually just be told what to do. I'd be a bit worried I'd employed one of them if I could get away with it. So there's a separate model on knowledge leadership. And then the last part of the course is 10 things I wish I'd known before somebody let me be in charge of anything, which is basically great balls up Martin made in that predominantly in the first couple of years, but there's a few that are a bit more recent. But it talks to things like, if you're recruiting, I know I went through the stage of I got promoted the first time, got a bit of a pay rise, and the person I had to get to replace me was paid damn near the same as what I was on. And I kind of kicked back against trying to find that for ages. And the thing I learned was grow up. That guy's going to get me a really good bonus. I've just got to suck that up and hire them. So there's tips like that. There's tips like never recruit anybody you think might just be good enough because you're under pressure. because actually it's really easy to manage out somebody who is a total wombat. Everybody's patience runs out, and the dickheads you manage out. But it's the ones that try really hard and are just good enough, and then you're stuck with somebody that looks like Brighton every year and finishes fourth bottom. It's like, oh God, and it drives you mental. So it's like, hang on for the better. Always explain why you've got an empty chair rather than put somebody in it who's never going to be good enough. So that's the sort of. So it's a bit of a mix of theory, practice, and hopefully tries to help people through that transition.
Thank you, Martin. Before you go on to your idea, I just want to explain to everyone that you've just had a tiny glimpse, without any of the usual anecdotes, of these 3 courses, which without the anecdotes, you're missing out on pure gold, which is why when we had our discussions, Martin came up with this idea of a panel. Martin.
Yeah, so we were trying to figure out what would work while we still would be struggling to get everybody in a space, and where traditional courses are still going to face-to-face struggle a bit for a little while yet. And that could be because some companies are still not sending people on courses, even though from next Monday they might be able to. We've still got a lot of venues that are insisting on face masks. There's all sorts of stuff that would get in the way. And one of the things we did at Boots as part of being in Doug years ago, we had it was actually Martin Callingham, it was Keith Dugmore, and the late Andrew Tasker. We kind of had them in, and we ran a workshop, and it was really good. But one of the team said back at the end of it, it was a bit like, it felt a bit shamanistic, which was a bit strange. But he said it felt like you were just being allowed in this big teepee to talk to the 3 wise men, and that anybody who couldn't get value out of that for a bit was a bit of a burk for not asking the right questions. And I thought, well, actually, there's something in that. So we know we've had probably 200 or 300 people must have been through the courses now in one description or another. And we've never done an awful lot to kind of feed back to them or have them ask questions. That stuff that says, guys, I've been trying to do this. I really wish I'd have asked you this that day or whatever. Because what we thought was to get the 3 of us together and run a workshop predominantly aimed at some of the people who've been on the courses and had questions about either almost a sort of Q&A, can we help you kind of seminar for people to just bring their problems and things they were struggling with, and as to try to use the lessons that we'd done on the courses, or just generally actually in the only Doug can do this. I dread to think what the combined experience of Martin Stewart and me adds up to, but it's a number that's fairly depressing. But it's like, there's not many training companies would stick you kind of into a room with people with, it must be over 100 years experience between us, and said, feel free to ask what you want about how to be a better analyst, senior analyst, or team leader. So that was the idea, that we did something which would be relatively open and free form, doesn't require us to produce an awful lot of materials that might or might not work online, but would add value to basically what people would get out of it would be very dependent on what they bring. If people bring good questions, they'll get value.
And that actually sums up what I was going to bring, a point I was going to make later, is that each of the courses, and I've attended most of them, well, I've attended all of them since I've been with Doug, they are made up of they are what the people are who are there. Every course has been different because each group of people are different. So you lose that when you're online, or if you have bespoke courses. So I'm going to cut this really short. I'm sorry, guys, but we're sort of overrunning. Are there any particular questions from anyone before I sort of wrap up?
No, I think it sounds fantastic, if I'm honest with you. I think my only question would be, would you want attendees to be sort of submitting their questions in advance, just to give you an opportunity to be frank, filter on quality and make sure they're not the same sort of question just answered 7 or 8 different ways, really?
It would be nice if they could, because it would give us a solid grounding, but then we could, I think, I don't know what Martin and Stuart would say, but I'd be happy to kind of go free form from that, depending on where the discussion takes us. But it'd be good to have that kind of grounding to get things kicked off.
Yeah, I think it also avoids the embarrassing silence right at the beginning where nobody wants to be the one to speak. So, yeah, 3 or 4 questions to get us going.
So what the general plan is, originally we were going to do this as part of the core courses, but as we move into face-to-face, I'm looking at having some face-to-face courses this year, before we go into the inevitable lockdown again, because that's what I'm expecting, which will be in Peterborough. That's something I've got to discuss with the trainers separately to make those dates available. I want all of the DUG organisations to understand that we need at least 8 to 12 people to make those courses face-to-face work. Any
I
less
think-
than that? Sorry, Martin, go.
I think that's the key thing for me. If I'm looking at mine, it's kind of the worst thing is we get 8 and then we find a few people have to drop out where it ends up with 4 because it'll be a bit crap. If we're kind of thinking, actually, my company is still going to struggle to sign off external training. Half my team are really keen to do face to face, but there's another half will absolutely sit in a corner with a mask on and not want to talk to people. If we do that, would it be better to do them online? Because I think I'm quite up for either, but I just want it to be good. So I'd like a steer on: do we go back to physical, and do we think that demand's there, or actually would the next 6-8 months still be better with us planning to do online?
So rather than discuss that here, which will probably take up the rest of the meeting, I'll be in touch with all of the DUG members to get some sort of feeling about that. The panel session that Martin was talking about, I'm going to suggest we actually hold it at our conference, which will be online in October, which is a way of introducing the panel. If we can't do face-to-face at all before then we'll look at doing other things and doing a mix and match of all of this experience and trying to get it out there in the best way we possibly can until we're free to do what we used to do. So those discussions will go on. Please email me with any ideas, suggestions on how you think it could work, and we'll sort of build that in. But at the moment, it's purely down to the trainers' availability, whether we can go face to face and all that sort of stuff. So I would like to thank all 3 of you. Thank you very much. Really enjoyed that.